Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is Thursday, February 4th, and we have entered our second half of the first week. Um, Starting out with our session for this afternoon, we will be discussing a number of topics involved in the industry. Really, kind of the role of a music composer and that role that they play within a larger game team. What sort of skills are brought to the table as a music composer, the overall structure of kind of the chain of command in a typical game project, who hires you, who has creative control, who signs the paychecks, all of those aspects of working either in a freelance role or an in-house role. So we'll be talking about the industry as a whole and how the music composer fits into all of that. And we'll also get into just some general introductory terminology that I will be referring to through the over the course of the entire month. So, bit of introductory material and an overview of the job roles, different job roles in the industry. So on Tuesday, we kind of gave an overview of the class, talking about what to expect from the class and what is expected of you, and how the assignments break down over the course of the month. And we started out with an introduction of the week one assignments. So hopefully you've taken the opportunity to download all of your week one materials and take a look at it, to play the game project 2D platformer, and to just kind of get an idea of what is involved with our first round of assignments. We talked about the game composition. We talked about your production technique, which was looping files, a series of tasks in creating a couple of different types of loops. And then the technical assignment is delivery of your files, the delivery of your game composition files in multiple different formats. So again, take the chance to download all of that stuff as soon as possible to run into any sort of issues, and then you can message me if you come across any sort of problems, and we can work our way through that. And then all of your assignments, your first round of assignments, are due on Sunday. All right, so that's where we left it on Tuesday. And for today, our first topic would be just kind of some overall ideas about the industry and different aspects about the audio industry for games. And starting out with the question of why game music? Why might you be even interested in working in this part of the industry, and why is your music as applicable in the game industry as it is in any other format? Oh, I disappeared. Let me pop back up here. So there is a textbook this month. Winifred Phillips wrote a Composer's Guide to Game Music, and it is filled with all sorts of wonderful information, and it follows right along with the class very nicely. And so there's a great quote of the amount of money flowing through the game industry and how it compares to other industries as a whole. So the video game industry is always touting its success, and the film industry and the music industry all have found different successes at different points, and are reacting to a lot of changes that the internet has brought, and digital distribution, and video games has really blossomed as an industry. And I don't mean that to sound like it's happened in any sort of short time frame or anything like that. or all too recently, it's been a number of years that video games have done and maybe even outpaced some of the other industries. It is kind of hard to compare apples to apples against the music industry versus the film industry versus the game industry, but it always seems like there's a game released, like a Grand Theft Auto or a Call of Duty or something like that hits $1 billion in its sales. And the film industry had its $1 billion year this year, of course, with Star Wars, and I think it's actually approaching $2 billion worldwide, which is very fun and absolutely ridiculous amount of money. But according to Reuters, video games were a $78 billion industry in 2012. And so there is a lot of money flowing through, and if it's just dollars and cents that you're interested in, there's a lot of opportunity in all sorts of facets in the game industry. So it has been climbing and rising and doing quite well overall. And so to give a bit more specifics about game audio and music specifically, there is, let's see, let me jump over here. There is a document called the Game Audio Industry Survey, which is a very handy resource for all sorts of information about audio and music for games and jobs and how much they're making and all sorts of aspects about the industry. And its Game Sound Conference was developed by Brian Schmidt, who is or was the audio director and kind of audio lead at Microsoft during the Xbox and the Xbox 360. And so he's gone on his own to do all sorts of different things, including putting on this Game Sound Conference. And as part of that, they release a survey every year to the industry, and they get hundreds of respondents back, and then they collate all that information together and produce a very handy document here. So I would definitely take the opportunity to go to gamesoundcon.com and find the Game Audio Industry Survey. It's a PDF. And there's all sorts of good information about how people are doing, compensation, work environment, different tools that people are using. And here's some good things that I want to get at. Some of the numbers here. This is compensation for salaried employees overall, and then compensation for freelance and for independent projects, for, I guess, all games, large budget games, and casual games and indie games. So this is just kind of, as a whole, these are salaried employees. These are in-house folks. They've been working in the industry for quite a while, and so the range is certainly wide open. Well, this is actually an average of all of the respondents, but an average of $80,000, working in the industry for 8 or 9 years. Worked on anywhere from 1 to 4 games over the past couple of years. And there is a big kind of rise around 40, 50, 60, and then quite a few people are hitting up in the 150s. I think these are big audio director names at big companies, and that might include bonuses over time. But this is also weighted towards the coasts, which is where a lot of production is. So the cost of living might be a little bit higher to correlate to these incomes. So those are people that have been working in the industry for quite a while. These are freelancer folks for all sorts of games, and then there's just big games and more independent games. So this is an average across everybody, and average project price $24,000. With also notice there's a big spike around 1,000 or 2,000 for smaller independent projects, kind of offset the weight of everything. These people have been working in the industry for a couple of years, five years or so. Well, that said 7. Large budget games, right? These are freelancers, music composers that, or audio directors or audio folks that are working for large games. And so the project price, and this is the entire project. This is not necessarily going straight into the composer's pocket, but this is the budget for everything, $73,000. These people have been in the industry for over a decade, and still there's ups and downs all over that changes the averages. So 50, 90, or 80. There's also a pretty big spike down at 10. And these are overall projects for really big return, or what am I trying to say? Big income games. Big sales. That's the word I'm looking for. Professionally produced casual games. So these are typically mobile games, and for also a big range overall. Man, I can't picture a $175,000 budget for the audio for a casual game. Maybe that's the full orchestral recorded score. What else? Independent projects, right? Around $10,000, or kind of $2,000 as a big. Well, we've got spikes around 500 and 1,000. There's 5,000. So understand that these are averages over time, and it depends on the respondents and where they are in their industry. But it gives some good numbers to take into account. There's other things in here. Game audio professionals are pretty much split between freelancers and employees working inside of a game company. Most game composers also deliver sound effects. 80% of all composers also delivered at least some sound effects. Integration programming done by freelancers. 21% provided some scripting. So an understanding of the basics of not real deep coding, but how the audio actually is played back in the game. And this is more towards sound designers, right? Game composers have a lot less need for that, or it's left up more towards the game company. But half of composers do some integration, which is understanding something like Fmod or Wise. So having an understanding of audio middleware tools are a very handy skill set to have. Game audio jobs are rarely hourly. That's a very kind of difficult way of going about it, of being able to quantify your ability to make music per hour, because sometimes you sit down, you can pound it out, no problem. And other times it takes, there's writer's block, and it takes a couple of days to figure something out. And so it can, an hourly rate is probably a more difficult way of going. Question here in the chat. So they're referring to Wise and Fmon when they're talking about integration. Typically, those are going to be the most popular tools out there right now. There are some other ones, but and we'll get to talk about a lot of different audio middleware options later in the month. But if it's not Fmod or Wise, it's typically some proprietary system that you wouldn't interact with anyway until you actually started working on the project. But the main skill set to have is really often found in Wise and Fmod. Per unit royalties are pretty rare, where you're actually getting some back-end royalty on the number of sales, because most of the time, the other thing to notice here, where was it? All of these say work for hire, which means that it is a 100% buyout. They own all the rights to the music after the fact. It's not going to be, it allows them to have it available for whatever they want to do with it after the game. If they've got extra downloadable content, or it needs to be released as a mobile game, or there's a website, or there's advertising or trailers, they want to own the rights for that song outright, so they can use it in all of its shapes and forms. Soundtrack clauses remain rare in large games, but more common in smaller games, which means Smaller game companies, they don't have enough money to pay you outright your full buyout rate, so they will leave you, or you get to retain the rights to the soundtrack so that you can sell the soundtrack separately and make some money back off that way. What else? Some information about live musicians and how they're used for different game projects, whether it's 100% in the box or some virtual and some live. With virtual with live streaming or sweetening. What else? Live musician budgets, middleware in games. You can see a couple of different middleware: Fmod and Wise, developers custom, no middleware, other. Those are one of the three main options. If it's not Fmod or Wise, it's their own proprietary thing. Big companies mostly do work for hire. They prefer you to pay the entire rate and buy you straight out. Small game companies, some more likely to keep some musical rights. Large games will likely register the music with PROs so that they can track it in all of its forms. I don't know. So there's lots of really good information in here. Definitely take advantage of going through that more with a fine-tooth comb and getting some solid info. So I think I hit on a lot of this stuff here. Average out employee. AAA projects. AAA projects mean big sellers. Lots of investment, millions of dollars of investment, and millions of dollars on return. Figuring out how much to charge and what your particular clients will handle is always a challenge, and I typically like to have a menu of options for a client so that if they come and they have enough money to successfully complete all aspects of it, then we can charge one particular rate or have more hours. Or if they only have a smaller budget overall, well, we can still help them out. We can still be their audio team, but we'll just kind of reduce the number of hours, the amount of work that's able to be done. So there's a great video. It's kind of like a game audio overview from Brian Schmidt, where he discusses the idea and one common question that he is brought to him often from film composers trying to move over to the game industry, and that is, why are films easy and games are hard? Like, what is the difference, and why is one just have a more straightforward approach than another one? And so a comparison between the film industry and the game industry can be really common because they have certain threads in their storytelling and their production process that will be the same between both of them. But of course, there are different aspects that are unique to both. So one aspect of the big difference is film has a much longer history than games, and there's been much more trial and error and much more time to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And so there's a history of and a language of film that new directors can use to explain what's going on. And so they also have the benefits of standards for audio in their industry, like Dolby. Dolby exists to create, not only to create, but they do create audio standards for lots of different speakers and audio gear and even rooms and environments. So the other thing that film audio enjoys is the fact that there are specific rooms that are built to that specification and tuned perfectly, called movie theaters, where people all go to watch a big screen movie. There is nothing like a game movie theater where it's perfectly set up to play a certain particular game. Everybody plays their games at home and through their TV, or they have headphones plugged into their computer, or little computer speakers or earbuds on their mobile device. And there's just a range of quality between all of these different ways that the audio and sound can be heard. So there is less specifications and less of a history to pull from. It's really kind of the game industry is really trying to figure itself out, and a lot of the rules and specifications are different depending on if you're releasing for Nintendo or Sony PlayStation or the Microsoft Xbox. Will have different requirements for the audio that changes the production. The other aspect is film is linear and game audio is non-linear, meaning that with film, every single time you rewind it back and play it again, you're going to hear the exact same thing. There is one audio file that plays from the beginning to the end of a movie that contains the entire surround mix that you're hearing. And again, every time you rewind back that particular scene and play it again, it's going to be exactly the same. So there's a lot more understanding of how things need to be heard perfectly for that scene. But with game audio, you have less of an idea. You have sometimes zero idea of what's going to happen and in what order anything will happen. And so there are so many different possibilities, and you have to account for all of the different changes and things that can happen with the audio. And so that sort of non-linear aspect where you don't know, you know what is possible in the game because you're part of the game team and they developed this game. And so, but what happens and when it happens and how it happens may be a bit different per each person that plays it. Especially in more modern games overall where the technology allows for lots of different possibilities. All right, hold on just a sec. Let me take a quick pause before we get into this next section. Okay. So, a couple of other ideas here. What other aspects of the game industry you might be interested in with audio and music? So, of course, the top one there, music composition. That's why we are here. That's what we are going to be talking about throughout the entire month. So most people interested in or going through this program and interested in games are interested in the composition side, but there are certainly other aspects to your music and sound. If you are more interested in working with the artists directly and their business managers and record labels and lawyers, getting access to the original recordings and the overall masters of that particular song. Music licensing is very necessary in lots of different games. Think about a music game, either a rock band or a Guitar Hero or a singing game or a dancing game or even sports games that require fully popular licensed music that you would hear in an arena or a stadium. All of that needs to be licensed from current popular artists, or maybe not even current artists, but popular artists that you need access to some specific either full mastered recording or the individual stems and tracks. If instead of dealing with more of the business side of things, if you are interested in the studio life, whether it's working in a studio or owning your own studio, Lots of studios are finding work with game companies because often a game team isn't equipped to have a full studio in their office. So they will hire out a studio to do dialogue recording, Foley recording, instrument recording, where they can have a acoustically sound spot to do all of their recording that's not directly in their offices. So gives another income stream for studio recording. Sound design, I'd probably say that there's even more job opportunity in sound design than music composition. And that is because typically it's just a game of numbers where there is often just one music composer assigned to a game team. There can easily be one or two or three or five or 10 sound designers attached to a project because it gets so big and there's so many sounds that are necessary in a game that there's just a lot of work involved in that. And sound designers can often move from one game project to the next, where if one time you're doing a open world fantasy game and the next you're doing a space zombie game, then sound designers have an easier time transitioning between wildly different genres, where a music composer is often known for either writing fantasy music or zombie music and may often transition back and forth. Here in the chat, Edward, is it possible to be assigned to several of these roles for a game? Absolutely. When we talk about all of the jobs that are available or the different job roles in a game team, it's important to know that not all of the jobs that you see here are at every game studio, and more than likely in a smaller game team, you are wearing multiple hats. You aren't the music composer or the sound designer. You are the audio person, and you just do all aspects in the creation of the audio. So it can be very common, especially as you're starting out, to be asked to do all sorts of different job roles. On location and field recording, if you are not interested in living your entire life in a dark, cold studio, you want to get outside and you enjoy weapons and cars and crashing cars and blowing things up, field recording is a fun aspect of all of that. There are a lot of game companies that need privately or fully proprietary audio libraries for their game. They don't want their game to sound like anything else, and so they don't use any pre-existing audio libraries like Sound Ideas or a Hollywood Edge. They want to go and create all of their own. So there is a different aspect of audio for games. Implementation. Implementation is the process of actually getting your music working in the game. So this is more of the tech side of things. This is in the game software itself and setting up so the correct piece of music plays at the correct time. It's almost like an interactive music mix and setting up which files play and how long do they play and how long do they loop for, or do they loop at all. That is more of what's known as implementation. It's almost like mixing your music soundtrack for the game. Here in the chat, how does one improve their skills with on-location and field recording if they haven't had experience with it before? Well, there is one aspect of field recording is that you typically have to have a little bit of gear to start out so that you can get out of your studio to record something. I guess you could probably drag your laptop and an extension cable, but having quality access to quality microphones are probably a good place to be. So something like a Zoom H2 or an H4 or H6, those are portable field recorders, are a pretty solid piece of gear to get started with for field recording. Most field recording is done on a larger professional scale. Sound devices, 8-channel field recorders, maybe 2 or 3 of them running at the same time, and those aren't cheap. Those are a couple of grand each, with 10 or 12 or 15 or 20 microphones all set up at the same time. So it's the one of field recording is like studio recording, where there's often a gear entrance fee, where it's kind of over time you build your gear up more and more and more. Or we have an audio rental company here in Orlando, and I'm sure depending on where you are at, they might have some of those around if you're in a larger area. But an audio rental company will allow you to rent a multi-channel field recorder or a whole kit for a couple of tens of dollars or over $100 or something like that a day to go out and record it. So that's a good way of getting access to really high quality gear and not having to throw money down. So somebody hires you, you probably have to have a little bit of library work to show off, something in a demo reel, but somebody hires you to do some field recording. Well, you don't have lots of money to throw at it initially. You can rent the gear. I sometimes with projects, I will do projects knowing that the money that I get from it is entirely going to go back and invest in my company and just buy more gear or buy software or buy access to something. I don't know. Yeah, it's one of those field recording can have a pretty expensive entrance into kind of high quality recording. And then the last one there is playing games for a living. For all of good or bad, one reason that you might be interested, and you probably should be interested, is because you play video games. And I know this is the way I moved over from the music and like more traditional music and audio kind of gigs, was I was playing video games all the time, and I was doing audio, and I was listening to things. I said, I could do that. The only difference between the music and sounds that I would create was the fact that they were in the game. So I started figuring out how to get my music and sound effects to actually work in the game, and started tearing them apart and trying to find the audio files and seeing if I could replace them. And this is certainly a good and bad thing, right? Some people would love to get paid to play and work on video games all the time. But typically what this means is you're not playing games for fun. You're playing games to actually make them better. And so it's like working on your album or working on a movie. By the time it gets released out to the general public, you don't ever want to see it again. But means you have to keep up in the industry. You have to play games. I certainly find I have a nice long list of games that I need to be playing, but I have like real life, like family and jobs and kids and all that sort of stuff. So playing games becomes a little bit more difficult, but overall it's absolutely important aspect of your job is to keep up with the industry and what is popular and what is cool and why is everybody really enjoying it. Back in the chat, would it be a good idea to pick up a Zoom HD or H6 to start with to build a library? Yeah, I think H4, H6. The H6 is a really nice one. It's got some serious improvements over the H4. I have an H4. I bought a sound device. So the H4 is, I don't know, at the time I bought it was like $300 or something, and I bought later on like a how much was that? Probably another $300 or $400 preamp to run into it. The microphones on the device are not awesome. Actually, they're pretty good for stereo recording, but for mono recordings, either stuff that's really, really loud or really, really quiet and you don't want any noise in it, I ended up buying a separate sound devices preamp that has analog limiters on it to be able to capture stuff very, very quickly and very loud. So, but the Zoom devices are a better, a very solid way of starting out. Does the Zoom H6 fix that issue? No, I mean, I don't know. I haven't played around with it. I don't think that the preamps would be massively improved. The one thing that it does do is it has different types of microphones. So you can actually like switch out a shotgun mic and a stereo mic and I don't know, some other different formats. But yeah, the H6 is going to definitely be an improvement over the H4. So it's a pretty solid way of getting started to get your own sounds. That way, your own your all your demo reels and all the work that you show off is your custom sound effects. And a really great way of going about this is to do some music and like do create a video demo and show off your music working in the game, and then show off how you did it behind the scenes to show exactly what you did, and then go do some of your sound design and sound effects, record that, but also film yourself recording those things to make a video that shows the behind the scenes. So you say, here's a really cool sound, and then this is how I did it. Those make for really good demos of your work. So some things to become a successful game composer. This comes from the book and has some key components to it of how you find success in the industry. And number one there would be a love of video games, right? If that's the industry that you're interested in, you should commit yourself to all sorts of what's popular and what's selling right now, and understanding all sorts of different games and what the industry's producing these days. So, and if you don't play video games, then it's certainly no time like the present to get started and get involved overall, because clients speak in terms of previous projects. When people are talking about a kick drum sound or a bass guitar sound, they reference other albums. Or if they want a particular style of music for their movie, they'll reference other movies. And if they want to talk about how the music sounds in their game, they will reference other games. So having an understanding and being able to speak the language is extremely important. Unafraid of creative and technical challenges. There are all sorts of challenges in music for games. Like I said, it's kind of the Wild West, and people are figuring things out, and the technology is rapidly changing, and there's all sorts of new and cool ideas and new parts of the industry to get involved in. Like right now, VR is really cool with the Oculus Rift and what is possible with the audio part of virtual reality or augmented reality is a really popular place that people are pushing into for video games right now. And so that it's a whole new way of playing video games. It completely shifts the paradigm of how things are supposed to work, and the audio goes right along for the ride. So being unafraid of figuring out problems and puzzles, and when working on a game, you don't get the luxury of working on the completed project all the way through. You are working on a broken game. Hold on here. I got a brand new chair today, and it's really, I got to work it out and figure it out. It's kind of uncomfortable if I don't sit upright, and got me all leaned back. I'm completely thrown off here. I apologize. Let me get myself taken care of. Okay. Oh, it's raining. So yeah, like I said, a game isn't finished until it gets released to the public. And even then, if you play games, there's downloads or updates and changes and all sorts of things that can still need to be fixed. So it is a technical puzzle to make it all work. Here in the chat, I completed the water temple from the Legend of Zelda when I was younger. Puzzles are fun, absolutely. The most fun game I enjoy playing, or the game I enjoy playing the most, is making games. Like, it's way more fun than actually playing games. I do enjoy playing games a whole lot. So figuring out all of those puzzles is lots of fun in the development process. A desire for involvement in a new art form. Like I said, it's constantly changing, constantly updating. New stuff is happening. So it is a new approach to interacting with music and audio. So having a new art form to work with, a new way of creatively expressing yourself as opposed to just linear music or even film, it introduces this whole level of interactivity where your music doesn't exist in just one form. It has it's this interactive form that moves and shifts and changes according to what goes on, and so creates all sorts of new challenges. But it is definitely a new way to go, and everybody is kind of pioneering what they're doing. What makes a successful game composer? Certainly a passion for composition, right? If you don't absolutely love sitting down in front of Logic and making music or whatever your favorite DAW is, then it becomes much more of a challenge overall. The question should be, if you had all the money in the world, what would you do? And also, if you had zero money in the world, what would you do? And the answer to that should hopefully be make music. Or even on top of that, play video games if you want to be a video game composer, right? If you had no money, it'd be kind of hard to get all the newest and latest games. So unfortunately, there is that sort of cost. But I know that if I had very little money, I would still bang rocks together and make music. If I had all the money in the world, I'd have this amazing studio and I'd probably make music for games. So it's just still what you want to be involved with and how you want to, well, there's probably a lot more noble things, I guess. Probably donate a lot to charity. And then I'd throw a big party for all my friends and family. But after that, maybe a couple years after that, and as I got really rich and bored, I'd probably start doing music for games again. Basically the idea there is that when you sit down in the studio and you're actually making music, that is the fun part. That is the best part. That if that becomes tedious or a challenge, then being successful becomes even more of a challenge. So it's all of the other stuff that's involved that makes it more difficult. So team member. This can sometimes be a challenge for certain musicians, where if you feel like you want to be the sole artist and it's your album and everybody follows your creative direction, then working on a film or television or a game might not be the best place, because it is a team sport. It is a team effort, and you are following the creative direction of a producer or a director for the game. So if you are difficult to follow somebody else's creative control or ideas, or fulfill their ideas, or have difficulty taking critique or feedback, then this can be more of a challenge overall, because it is definitely a group effort to get the job done. And probably what makes the most of a successful game composer would be being a small business owner, being able to keep your lights on and food on your table, because that can be really a challenge, right? All of this stuff that you are learning through the degree program, the music theory, the composition, the production, all of that is the fun and easy part once you are sitting down and in the studio making music, right? That should be effortlessly flowing through you, because what really makes or breaks a successful game composer is the ability to find clients, network with those clients, deal with contracts, deal with the legal aspects, make sure you get paid, dealing with all sorts of adult fun things like taxes and insurance and retirement and other benefits, and being able to cover all that stuff on your own. All right, that's really much more of a challenge. And often what happens as you're starting out is that you screw yourself over, where you realize that, oh, wow, I just got screwed out of something in that contract, or I could have charged a whole lot more money, and this ended up taking 3 times the amount of work and time for the same amount of money that I agreed to earlier. You will get things like in the beginning, nobody's going to know or care who you are. And you're going to be trying really, really hard to establish a name for yourself. So you get a couple of credits and you start building and building and building your credit list and your repertoire. And you get more people interested and involved. And all of a sudden, you've got too much work. It's just you working on things and lots of people are calling. And you've got to turn down work. And how do you balance? It always seems like everybody needs it all at the same time. And then when you're not working on a project, nobody cares and nobody's calling. So it's you'll get some checks that'll have a nice healthy number on it, a couple of zeros behind it, and you'll say, yeah, I made a lot of money on this, but you got to make it last for the next couple of months while you are out there working and finding the next thing. So being successful as a business owner, beyond being a good composer, probably will allow you to maintain and continue working as a successful composer. So next thing here is we're going to hit on a couple of different jobs in the industry. And like I pointed out earlier, the jobs that we're going to talk about here are not necessarily at all game companies, because different game companies are different sizes and have a different corporate structure or have no structure at all, and they're just a handful of people thrown together in a team. And so these different jobs you might encounter in different game companies, but the bigger it gets, the more people have individual jobs and wear a single hat, and just they are the audio director, or they are the music manager, or they are the music composer, and then they are the sound designer. But in smaller game teams, you are often looked at as the audio person altogether. You do music and sound effects and dialogue and maybe some tech to help to get it all working together. And it's a lot of figuring it out all together to make it work. So there's typically two paths to go down in getting involved with a game team, whether that is in-house or freelance. And in-house means you are a salaried position, and you have the ability to you move to the city or state or wherever, move to the office that they're working in. You have your own office. Hopefully you can close the door so that you can be the audio person, or you're working in headphones so you don't completely distract everybody in the office. And you have full-time pay. You get paid every 2 weeks. You have benefits. They take care of things like, they have insurance plans, and you have retirement options, and they take out taxes. And so they can take care of a lot of things for you. And that's more of a traditional 9 to 5, maybe longer at crunch periods. But it's much more of a traditional role. And you have the best part about it is you go to work and you make music and you make sound, and you don't have to worry about finding clients and getting involved networking to that extent to pick up project to project. Freelance contractors, they are most of the music for games. Most of the composers are hired on a freelance basis per project. It's kind of like a composer for a film. A film studio doesn't have an on-staff full-time composer. Directors work with their favorite composers between different types of projects. So similar idea for games. A freelance role is quite common, and you can end up making quite a bit more money on a freelance role because, number one, you can work on multiple projects at the same time. And you have, they don't have to take care of all of those things like deal with taxes and benefits and insurance and stock options and all those sorts of things that are part of the full payment package. They can just pay you more money outright because they don't have to cover all that stuff, but you do. So you not only do you have to make all the music and make all the sound effects, but you have to find clients. You have to keep up with your networks of people. You have to make sure you get that consistency from one month to the next, so that you're always working and you don't have any downtime. And you've got to deal with taxes and insurance and benefits and all those fun things that are very, very important as a business. So you get all of the benefits of, hey, you're a freelancer, so you can set your own hours, you can determine who you want to work with, you can go to work in your pajamas because you just go to your office studio, you work out of your home or whatever it is. But the reality is that you're probably working more hours than anybody because you're working your tail off to get everything done and completed. You have to make sure that you are properly interfacing and communicating and networking with clients and future clients to maintain those relationships. And you're probably working even harder than somebody who's working in house because you have the whole business aspect to maintain. So there is a lot more possibility off of a freelance role, more money, more projects, but there also comes with a lot of challenges to maintain yourself as a professional business. Next one here. I want to talk a little bit about the idea of developers and publishers and how they work together in the game industry. And I relate this to the recording artist and the record label, or the band, or the artist production team and the record label, the folks that are making the actual music project, and the record label that's setting out the budget and distributing it overall. Oops, go right there. Hold on, let me take another quick pause before we get into this. So, game publishers. Game publishers are, maybe you recognize some of these over here: Electronic Arts, Take Two, Activision, Ubisoft. You've got Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft. You've got Time Warner, ZeniMax, Atari, Sega. All sorts of those are the big name publishers, and those publishers work with different game developers. So the publishers are like the record labels. What the publisher is going to do is determine which projects are going to be published, which ones are going to be created, set out the deadlines and the schedule for production, and give the budget, provide the investment in the project to get it going and off the ground. Game developers, they take the money, they take the schedule, and they are the tech folks that actually make the game. The game developers are the people that you work for. So they are making the game. They are the programmers, the artists, the sound and audio team and music team, the designers, the testers, the actual folks. They're like the artist production team that is making the record. They're making the game. Then, hopefully, within time and within budget, they deliver that project back to the publisher, and the publisher presses millions of discs or puts it online to sell, and they sell it and share the money back with the developer. So it's similar to concepts that we are familiar with from the audio or from the music industry. And a lot of publishers have or are game developers also. So the game industry is kind of like the what the music industry was more back in the 80s and 90s, with a lot more independent record labels. as music genres got more wide and diverse, lots of smaller record labels popped up to produce all sorts of independent music styles. And over time, all of those different record labels that were producing um, these unique genres of music were bought up and eaten up by the record labels. And so they got bigger and bigger, and now we're down to just the few uh, mega media conglomerates that we have. And the game industry is kind of taking this sort of direction where smaller game companies are self-publishing on the internet and becoming really big and popular, and they're just buying each other up, so that you have the big ones like Activision and Electronic Arts that have many different game companies. Even a Sony or a Microsoft or Nintendo have contracts with lots of different game companies to actually make and develop their games. Electronic Arts, one of the big parts of Electronic Arts, of course, is EA Sports. EA Sports, it doesn't exist in just one place. It's across many studios all over the world. And like here in Orlando, we have Tiburon, which made games separately from EA Sports for quite a while. And then they hooked up with Electronic Arts to make one version of Madden or something many, many years ago. And they've basically taken over that from then on. And they got bought up by Electronic Arts, and they're effectively part of EA Sports. So these bigger companies will have lots of different job roles, and especially here in audio management, where this is really higher up the chain overall. So an audio director is typically the individual who oversees all game projects, or at least all of the audio and music for game projects at that company. If the company makes multiple games, then there's an audio director that oversees all of those. There's even an audio director for Electronic Arts that oversees all of the projects across multiple different game studios. So this can be a really big, high up position. They are the ones who determine the budgets for the audio and music. They determine the scheduling. They determine how many people are going to be hired. And then there's the audio lead. The audio lead is the main point person, the head of audio for just one of those specific games. So the audio lead might work on multiple different games, but typically at one at a time, they're focused on the creation of all of the audio and music for that one game. So again, at EA Sports or at Tiburon here in Orlando, they do Madden, they do NBA, they do some FIFA, a little bit of Need for Speed. And so there are audio leads on all of those different projects. The audio lead is the person who hires you as the music composer. They have a lot of control over the creative direction of the game. They take the money, they take the budgets and the schedule, and they make sure it happens. So they hire the team of people, the sound designers, the music composers, all of the audio tech folks, to make sure this job gets done. Typically earlier on in the process, the audio lead is in a lot of meetings with all of the other leads and the designers and the directors and producers and everybody making decisions. And as the game takes shape and form and gets closer and closer to the end, they really get their hands dirty and are working on it, and certainly all the way through, but they join in heavily towards the end of the project. A music manager. If your game requires enough music that you either have multiple composers on the project, or you're having to manage a full orchestral session with lots of players and a particular great studio and big budgets, or you are licensing a whole lot of music for a music game, a music manager can be useful in those scenarios. We have one of our graduates from Full Sail from the Recording Arts program is now the music manager at Sony. This was before the music production degree existed. but is the music manager at Sony and worked on things like The Last of Us and the Uncharted series. And he is basically in charge. Works like a producer for a music album. So they have a composer who is in charge of making the music, but in the large sessions that are required to actually capture all of that from a full orchestra, um, it is a separate job entirely because it's on such a large scale. Yeah, that is Jonathan Mayer, who works out at Sony. There's a great video of him included in all of the videos that are provided each week. So that's the audio management side. That's the lead team. Then more of the creative designer folks. We got the music composer, of course. That's what we're here to talk about. And they are in charge of all aspects of the creation and the production of the music. So you are hired to create the music, and it's the game company wants less involvement. You take care of everything. You produce amazing music. You send it to us, and we approve it, and we move forward. So typically paid by minute of finished music. This is a great metric to go by for payment, right? To kind of figure out, okay, your game needs 10 minutes or 20 or half an hour or 60 or 5 hours worth of music or whatever it is. And however long it takes me, it doesn't, as long as I keep it within the deadline, it can take me any amount of time. But once it's all done and completed and approved, then for every minute of music, you're going to owe me so much money. And if you need more music, then we'll add it in at that same rate. So it's a good way of going about figuring out how much to charge, depending on how much work is involved with each minute of completed music. Sound designers, they are tasked with all of the sounds for characters and weapons and vehicles and environments and all sorts of aspects. So they are often a team of folks. There's a little bit more of the tech involved because music for games is often playing in the background and is less interactive than gunshots and footsteps and punch sounds and car sounds and explosions and all those fun things. Those often have a lot more interaction with the game. Most of the time the music is turned on and turned off at certain spots, but it's not like the game is creating the music or manipulating it too heavily through the gameplay. There's also the audio programmer, implementer. These are the tech folks. These are the ones that take your music, they take your WAV files, they go into the code, and they make sure that the game finds the WAV files and plays them at the correct time. So it's definitely a more technical aspect of the entire process. But as we saw, there were a lot of game composers that were kind of dabbling and doing aspects of the implementation. And as we get more, we'll talk, just kind of introduce it a little bit here, but more so in the rest of the month as we get into the second half, talking about the technology, we'll discuss a little bit more about what implementation does for us. Beyond the audio team, this is always important because these are the folks that you'll be working with. Your audio influences graphics and the gameplay, and your music is influenced by everything else, and things like art and programming and QA are all influencing your music too. So it's kind of a back and forth feedback loop. But the art especially, right? Your music and your sounds have to match up with art and animation, 2D artists, 3D artists, motion capture. Those are the folks that create. I mean, and if there's 3 or 5 or 10 audio people on a game, there can be 30 or 50 or 100 or 500 artists working on a game. There's just so much art required. I think for Grand Theft Auto, which is just a huge, massive game, there were like 5,000 people working over 7 studios. Well, it's probably not. Probably more like 3,000 people working over 7 studios around the world. and that's, I mean, that's everything, artists and programmers and audio and design and all sorts of aspects. But that's just a lot of people all working together because the games are so massive. There's the programmers, of course. They are the people that use, I'm sure it's black magic to open up Notepad and pound out a whole bunch of text and get a game on the other end. That's a really horrible simplification and it's not the process at all. But programmers are well paid because they do amazing work to make the computer do exactly what you want. So that includes all aspects of graphics and gameplay and networking and AI and physics and audio. So you don't need to program because there are programmers on the game team that you make better music than you program and they make better programs than they make music. So it works really well together. And but being able to speak the same language, being able to communicate your ideas in more of a technical way will often help because it's just as hard for them to speak music as it is for you to speak code. Quality assurance or QA. These are the people that are testing the game and trying to break it and find all of the bugs. They're not going to tell you that your music sucks or anything like that. They're not going to tell you, oh, that's out of key. But they will say that the music isn't playing at the right time or the correct way, or it's playing in the entirely wrong area, or it plays and stops and doesn't loop, or there's all sorts of things. And QA is a great way of getting involved in the industry. It's not a very glamorous job, but you would learn a whole lot in the production process of games. And it's most game teams would rather hire from within, so they often look to their QA team for people doing well, whether they're into design or whether they're into programming or whether they're into audio. You join a game team and you say, hey, I'm interested in music and audio, and I would love to work with the audio team and help them out with all their issues or bugs, and you then build a repertoire overall with those folks. Here in the chat, how does one get involved with doing QA? My experience with QA was kind of a cattle call, meaning that they will open up jobs as a new game is available, and you will see those jobs very regularly. They have a pretty high turnover because it's can be pretty obnoxiously boring or repetitive. It's like, here, take this sword and go hit this wall until you fall through the level or the game crashes, and then write a bug report as to why it happened. But it is there's a lot of opportunity. Doesn't pay very well, and you're basically locked into a room with a whole bunch of folks with lots of PlayStations or Xboxes, and you're playing right along. But like I said, it's a great way of getting started working for them for a couple of months and building up interfacing with folks, and then when there's opportunity on the audio team, you move up from there. So they're typically, the best way of finding them is I have gone out and sought out as many different game companies that I can find, and I bookmark all of their career pages or their jobs page, and then I go check it every once in a while. Every couple of weeks or every month or something, I'll just go load them all up and look for audio or music or QA or something like that, and try to find the jobs that are available. And there's always something to look into. Go try to find a record studio or a record label or a production studio and see if they have a jobs page. And it's a much different reaction in the music industry than in the game industry. There's always a jobs page. Whether or not they're hiring currently for audio is a different thing, but they always have something to check and keep up with. So a couple last topics here, some of the terminology that we wanted to hit on that we'll be using throughout the month. First one being implementation. I mentioned that implementation is kind of like the setting up the interactive mix for your music, determining which file plays at what time, how loud does it play with any other files, How do those files mix together? Do they play once or do they loop? Do they loop infinitely or a certain number of times? How do they transition or crossfade? There's all sorts of different things that happen in the game. The game can control volume and pitch and panning and real-time effects and does all sorts of stuff to your music. So game implementation is setting up, or music implementation is setting up the music to work and function properly in the game. So this is setting up music behavior, sound effects behavior, and it is a job role. You will hear somebody referred to as an audio implementer or the task of implementation. So it is typically somebody who has an understanding of the game software, can maybe get into a little scripting also, and understands how the music and the technology work together. The next piece of terminology that I want to hit on is the idea of a music system, a game music system. And when I refer to a music system, I am talking about the part of the game that plays your music. And we know, well, the game is software and it's code and it's running on a computer. So it's somewhere in the code, and we don't really have to think about that all that much. But when I'm referring to the technology that's actually playing back your music and how does it play, I'm referring to a music system. And more specifically, we are talking about dynamic music systems. A dynamic music system is a music system that changes over time. The opposite of this would be a static music system. Hitting play in Spotify or your MP3 player or something like that is a static music system. It plays and it stops and it rewinds and it plays and it stops, and that's really it. There's nothing to interact with. A dynamic music system changes according to what's going on in the game or player input. So overall, everything that we're talking about through this month is referring to a dynamic music system. And more specifically, we have a couple of different types, an adaptive music system, an interactive music system, and a generative music system. Oops, too fast. An adaptive music system. This is a music that reacts to what the player is doing. I'm sorry, that's not entirely correct. It is reacting to the player and to the game, but it is not. You do not have direct input. It's not like you're hitting a button and you're changing the music. Adaptive is adapting to the world around you. It is adapting to things like how much time is left in the game, how many enemies are around, or how much danger are you in. It reacts to how much health you have, or what's the score, or how much money or treasure do you have. So it is a music system, and most game music systems are like this. They are reacting to what's going on around the player, but the player does not have direct control. That is what an interactive music system is. An interactive music system, the player has direct control over the music that they hear. The best examples of this would be singing games and dancing games, or a rock band, or a Guitar Hero, or something like that, where you hit buttons on a controller, or you sing or dance or do something, and it has direct influence over what you hear. And often, if you mess up, then it plays the wrong thing, or it plays like a bad note or something. So you are directly controlling the audio. There's some other games. I don't know if anybody has played Audio Surf, which is a really cool game, which is actually this one. Where'd it go? This one. This is Audio Surf, where you're surfing through different lanes and you're affecting the music. It's kind of like Guitar Hero in a rocket ship. What other ones what did I just think of? Sound Shapes. I don't know if anybody played that on the PlayStation. Kind of a smaller independent game. And basically the whole game is a step sequencer. and it's a platform game where you're running and jumping around, and you're like this blob, and I don't know, it's all set to an electronic music score, and you have direct influence over what you hear. Rocksmith, absolutely. Here in the chat, would Rocksmith be another one? Yeah, it's a direct. If you don't hit the right notes, then you don't hear the full or the correct parts of the song. Next one is a generative music system, and a generative music system is where the game is actually creating the music in real time. It is not a single wave file that is playing and looping. The music is being determined by the game and reacting directly to what's happening in the game, but it's not playing wave files necessarily, or it's not playing a full stereo mix. It is broken down into individual instruments. So this is where music composers go, oh no, the computers have taken over, the robots have taken over, and they don't need me as a music composer anymore. They're just going to make the game make all the music, and I'll be out of a job. And that is, at least currently, or any time in the near future, not the case, because we have generative music systems have been around since the dawn of game audio, or games really themselves. But we really haven't gotten it right where we have completed a full interactive score that sounds like what a human would write. It really ends up being very random. What you do here is you say, okay, I have a kick, snare, and hi-hat sample. And I can tell the computer you can play the kick on the 1 and the 3, and the snare on 1, 2, 3, or 4, but none of them back to back. And here's the hi-hat. The hi-hat can play either a quarter note pattern, an eighth note pattern, or triplets. The bass is going to be in this pentatonic scale. The chord progression or harmonies are going to be in here are 8 chords that you can choose from. And the melody is going to be in this key or scale or mode or whatever it is. And then beyond that, the game is effectively randomly choosing notes out of a hat. It gets a lot more complex, and people have done some amazing things overall and making it way more involved in that. But it's still, you're basically teaching music and theory to the computer, and there's just so much in music that humans put into their music that can't really be replicated by a computer, at least not yet. So this really hasn't been used all that much. You'll hear it every once in a while in little pieces and parts. There was a game out there called Spore, which was released by Electronic Arts. It was the same person that did Sim Earth and The Sims, I think The Sims, and Sim City and all of those. Spore was, it was like Sim Universe. You could create your own universe and planets and characters, and the whole music system was an ambient music score by, I think it was Brian Eno that did it, but it was heavily reliant on a generative music system, and it worked very well in ambient music because ambient music doesn't have form and structure and all of those things that humans typically build into their music. The game development production cycle. This is the last topic that we'll hit on. What I want to do is talk very generally about the kind of schedule or flow that a game typically takes. And just to point out, so this idea, we relate it to something that you're probably familiar with, which is pre-production, production, and post-production, which is very common in movies. It doesn't really hold that much truth in games, but it gives us some categorization of how things might divide out into the game process. So pre-production would be determining what the game is, hiring your teams of people, determining like who you need and how much, how many people do you need on your team, what equipment are you going to use, is it all going to be PC or Mac or a mobile game, determining the game technology, where does it exist, what game tools are you going to be using. If not, you're going to be writing them all yourself. Not you, but the game team is. schedules, figuring out how long things are going to take, and deadlines and milestones. A design document is an important tool to kind of outline the entire game and give everybody a sense of what the game is about. Musical steps up in the top right-hand corner. Now, as the music composer, you're typically not hired on really early in the process because there's not even a game to make. What can sometimes happen is you're hired on before there's a game and you write some kind of speculative demo music, and they give that off to the artists and everybody else, the programmers, to kind of inspire them as to the sense of the music overall. So there might be some conceptualization and some spotting to figure out where things might go, and just kind of preliminary ideas. And then often you'll be involved less with the project over the next weeks or months while they start pounding out the more of the full game, and then you get more involved after that. Now, so after pre-production, we have production. This is really where the game sits most of the time. The game is basically constantly in production all the way up until its release. So this is where you're generating most of the music soundtrack. You are figuring out where music goes and how much you need, and how is it going to fit in the game. So you start out with a huge pile of to do, and you have to make all of this music. And over time, your lists of music that you have to create and the music that you have already created and that is done and approved, your one pile gets smaller and your pile of completed music gets bigger and bigger. So you might be testing the audio engine, doing some implementation of making sure files play at the right time in the right location and loop properly. There's a bit of prototyping and play testing. Prototyping is testing out your music and sounds in the game. We hear it on our own, and we, as the music composer, you finish the music at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you need to send, you have a deadline, and you're sending it off to the client, but you need to test it out. And so a lot of tools are available for you to test out your music where it's not in your DAW, but it's also not in the game. Playtesting is once they actually put it in the game, you should be playing it as much as you can to see how it works. And so there really isn't much of a post-production process. Most of the games stay in production all the way up until the very end. Games are different than movies and television, where you film the scene, the actors leave the set, and you go off to your studio to edit, and you don't really go back to the original film, or you don't go back to film everything all over again unless you really, really have to. But games, they can constantly change and develop all the way up until the very, very end. So if there was something that could be related to post-production, you have these ideas of alpha and beta software. You might be probably are familiar with beta software, whether it's beta audio software or a plugin or something like that. Beta, well, let's start with alpha first. Alpha is before beta. It's typically not released out to the public. Alpha is trying to be the first fully working, complete version of the game that's probably riddled with bugs and has lots of problems to it that they need to figure out. So, but it's either the full game or probably more than likely a slice of a larger game that you can show off to investors and the development or the publishers, and maybe do a demo at a convention. But it's not finished by any means. Beta is often the first one that can be tested by the public. So if your game has massive resources, if it has an economy of people put real money into the game and it shoots out gold coins in the game and they can spend it on hats and silly skins or whatever it is, all of those fun microtransactions that games get into these days. If you have a massively large multiplayer online game, there's only so much you can test with a team of QA folks. of testers. There's no better way of getting a real sense of your project unless you release it out to the public. And the public is going to completely tear it apart. The internet is vicious, and they'll tell you everything that's wrong with it, and it still gives you time to go back and fix everything. And quality assurance is there. They're kind of a ditch effort of playing the game, testing it over and over again to find any sort of problems and bugs. They won't fix them. They'll just point at something and say, that's wrong. And you'll go, oh, yes, it's wrong. And it'll send it back up to the audio team. They fix it, and it goes back down. They test it, and they say, now this is wrong. And it goes back and forth, and they mean well, but it certainly can get very frustrating and very stressful at the end when all sorts of new bugs are popping up right before deadlines. So just a couple of ideas there of the job teams and in-house and freelance, the different jobs available. What else? We did some terminology of implementation and music systems, and we rounded it out with the kind of the production process, the overall flow of a game over time. So absolutely, there is a lot that goes into the process, and there's a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of different job roles all putting it together. It's like a big old house of cards that looks impressive when it's all done, but you don't want to pull out any card or else the whole thing will crash and fall. So let's go ahead and wrap it up there. If you have any questions, I'll stick around for a few to chat. And please get in contact with me before the weekend if you have any sort of technical issues or troubleshooting. We can figure any of that sort of stuff out. So thank you very much, and I will see you again on Tuesday. All right, have a good weekend.